everybody, it's Claire here from Sewing by Claire, and today, to start off the new year, it's January 2026, and to start off this new year in an easy way and for me to be able to get back into the hang of making video tutorials, because I've had a bit of a break off and been doing some Christmas present stitching, then I'm starting off with this nice easy, I can say beginner because we're going to go through it from a beginner point of view, pattern and tutorial for making babies' bibs. Now, on first reflection, you may think I've not got a baby in my family, but every family at some stage or another, or neighbours down the street, or friends of friends often have babies, and it's a really nice, easy new baby gift that doesn't have to cost a lot of money and it doesn't have to take a lot of time, but will always be really useful, and actually as a palette cleanser as well. If you've been doing a few difficult projects recently or things that have required a lot of thinking time, then again this one can be really easy. So I'll just show you a couple of the finished ones that I've done. So this one is just what we're going to be, the equivalent to what we're going to be making today. A little bit creased because it's been put to one side. Should have ironed it, my apologies. But it's just got this oval shaped bottom to it, which I've adjusted from the pattern to make it fit my fabric scraps, and it's double-sided, so depending on what the child is wearing, the parent or carer can then choose to put a different fabric or a different side out facing. Now it's made of 3 layers. 2 layers are quilting cotton and then 1 layer is an internal layer, just to try and make it a little bit more absorbent. You can pad these out in the middle with terry toweling if you wanted to, or some sort of cotton microfiber, something like that, that would soak up any dribble from babies, especially when they're teething. They aren't intended for bibs when they're eating necessarily, because there's nothing to catch anything when they're wearing them, and I think some of those plastic ones that have the little sort of cup at the bottom are easier for parents to use when they are feeding them. But these are sort of ideally for decorative when they're going out and about, and they're quick and easy to swap in and out for the parent. And as I say, just when the baby is a teething, they just tend to dribble constantly, don't they? And so it picks up all of that. The pattern that we're going to use today is, well, this is the first one we're going to use. I'll explain why I say the first one. And this bib actually comes from this pattern. Now, this is let me just put it forward for you so you can see the link is here for where to get it from. So it's a company called Teland Craft. Teland. I'll put it on the screen as well for you so you can see that on there. And she did a pack of 3 bibs and I picked up all 3 designs. So this one is a ruffled one, but don't be put off if you want to sew for boys, because mine is still a nice bib, and we're going to be adjusting this pattern to make this bib so it's nice and easy. She also does a scalloped bib as well, which is really pretty. And actually when the child is wearing that, because my granddaughter Harriet was wearing this when she came over to visit us, and because I made it in a lovely fabric, it almost looked like a collar accessory onto her outfit. So that's quite a nice thought too. So that's the scalloped edge one. And then they also make this one here, which is a star pattern. You can follow. Now you can go online and find adverts for free bib patterns, and you might be able to find one there that you like, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just chose to buy these 3 because I liked the designs, and I don't mind buying a pattern and rewarding the designer for the time and effort they've put into designing it. I don't then have to have a child in front of me to know how big the neckline is, how far out to come on the shoulders, or even just to think up the different designs. I can follow along, and then I've got this pattern forever. So that's why I'm happy. I'm always very happy to support the designers. They do a lot of the hard work, but then hopefully I can then show you how you can turn something like this, which you might think, oh my goodness, I couldn't ever make that, just into something fairly simple. Once you've mastered this basic, obviously you can go back and do the scalloped, and I'm hoping in the future to do some more tutorials on the scalloped and the star and the frilled bib, in order that you can add to these, because the The ways to personalise them are endless. If you love embroidery, you can embroider a design onto the front of something like this very easily. If you just like to do your applique, you can applique an initial on the front there. You can split the colours. I've done some bibs where I've actually put it across, and my scraps weren't big enough to do one bib in one fabric on one side, so I split it, added seam allowance where I'd done the cut, and then sewed the fabrics together, and then that was then big enough to make a bib as well. So there are lots of ways to design them. And then this one that we're doing now, which will be this one, can also be elevated, and I've added some little antique ribbon there, or antique looking ribbon, and a little rosebud there. Just remember, you've always got to think when you're making something for a child or a baby about their ability to put that part into their mouth. So if you have a child that likes to, well, even if you don't, you never know whether they might do. I was going to say put things in their mouths, but all babies do that. But any embellishment has to be really, really firmly fixed on. So this little rosebud has been sewed on to within an inch of its life in order to keep that on there. And I'm hopeful that that will not pose a choking risk. Obviously, the discretion is at the parents. In order, I can make them, and then they can be used just with supervision all the time, or they can choose not to use it at all and either donate it or gift it away. I had the fun of making it and gifting it. It's then up to the parent whether they want to use them. But we do want to try and make sure that they're as attractive as possible to the parents for that reason. So just be aware, anything like buttons or just beads or anything like that are probably not a good idea for putting onto a bib, just because the child can easily fold that up into its mouth and chew, and you'll be surprised, even if they suck on things, how quickly that can become dislodged. But this one in this case has been sewn on within an inch of its life. But as I say, I can either remove it and just leave it as the lace, which would still look nice for Harriet, or you know, we can just leave it for them to say with supervision only. Okay, just one other thing, there are a couple of ways of closing these bibs up. Some is to use some snaps, and I've got a purchase snap here. I do find the metal ones are probably a little bit easier to use, because some of the plastic ones you really have to get your fingers into to get them open, but something like cam snaps, sometimes you've got those, and you can buy those quite inexpensively from places like eBay or from Amazon as well, and they tend to come in kits with different colours. If you want to make a variety of these, then choose a neutral colour that's going to go, or choose something like the metal ones. I mean, that one's got a little pearl detail on the top there, but you don't have to use that kind of thing. I have got some, but then also I've also got this one here, and I've put a button on the back of that one with a couple of buttonholes. And that works well, for when the baby's smaller, can just put it onto a tighter button and have it smaller with the excess just at the back, just waiting. Or if the baby is a little bit larger or older, then we can move it onto the next one. And it just helps that longevity, and just make sure that any dribble doesn't sort of dribble down the front and not reach the bib when they're wearing it. But also, plenty of us generally have spare buttons from garments that we've purchased, and that's perhaps a good way to be able to use those up. I will show you how to use the buttonhole foot on my machine, which is a Janome, but it may vary for your machine, or you may never have made a buttonhole before. So again, it's one of those skills that we can elevate, or you may just prefer to use snaps. So those are the options. Today I'm just going to make the equivalent of a two-sided plain bib like this one, and then we can always embellish those as they go forward. But as I say, great for scraps. I've patchworked them before and made up a patchwork fabric from scraps. We can quilt them. We can do all sorts of things that we want to do with them. Right, okay, let me just turn the camera down and we'll get started. Okay, so first of all, you want to have bought your pattern or picked up a pattern from wherever you're going to be using it from. As I say, mine is from Tell End Craft on Etsy. And on there, you'll find there's a pattern piece here on there, been put onto two pieces. All you do is cut along, well, actually don't cut along the pattern. I recommend that you trace the pattern off onto tissue paper. And the reason why we do that is because then you've always got your master file in hand, and you can refer back to that and make a new paper template if you want to. But if you cut this up, every time you want to remake this pattern, if you lose a piece, you're going to have to reprint it. So it's just an economy over time that I found. And all we do is we lay our tissue, well, we're going to lay our tissue paper over the top of the pattern here. And then I trace around the edges, and I made a mark where the dotted line started. And then I just came along to the other dotted line, put those marks on top of where I'd finished tracing already. And then I just traced the rest of the pattern and then cut that out. This is half the pattern, so you've got a mark here that says to put this on the fold line, so I'll show you how to do that. It's very simple, and quite a lot of patterns often have these markings on them to say that it's going to be on a fold line. So that's what you need to do first off. Now, in order to make the one that we're making today, which is this very nice, simple, straightforward bib, we're not adding the ruffle to that. So that'll be a different tutorial to add the ruffle on at another stage, but that's the pattern that I've used to start off with to make it easier. Now, the other thing that you'll notice from the pattern and from my design is that I've just taken off the point at the bottom here. So if you look there, I've not taken that down, and I'll show you why in a second. But that's what we need to do in order to get the pattern ready to be able to use that. So then you're going to need to choose your fabrics. And you don't need very much. This is a piece of fabric that I've got from something called a layer cake, or 2 pieces of fabric actually, because I've got right sides together at the moment. So there's my 2 designs. So again, I'm going on the reversible basis that either fabric can be used as the outside, but if you're short of fabric or you've not got much, then don't forget you can have a decorative front, and then you can use something like an old duvet cover or something like that that complements your final fabric, in order to, obviously it needs to be laundered well, but then you can cut into that to give you a nice quantity of cotton fabric to use for the back, and then you would then be able to make 2 bibs rather than just the one. But as I say, for me, I like to make them reversible because I just think it is useful for the parent. Okay, so these pieces of fabric here are 10 inches square, and they've come from something called a layer cake. That doesn't matter. That'll only make any sense to you if you are somebody who likes to quilt or do patchwork, because this is a pre-cut sized piece of fabric from the manufacturer, and it comes in a pack of roughly 42 different squares. The idea with those is that any of the 2 colours or any of the 2 squares and fabrics in the pack will match with each other. So although originally I might not look in my stash and think these 2 match, because they're from the same layer cake, the colour, the red in there, is exactly the same as the red in here, and that's why they work so well together. So if you are wanting to make quite a lot of these, then a layer cake, whilst it's expensive and it's good quality fabric, may well take out that guessing game of having to match fabrics to each other if you're not confident with colour or with designs, and you want something that's going to look cohesive for your child or for the gift that you're giving. And that's why I chose these. I just thought this was a nice and easy way to go through, and they're a little bit different. They're not too cutesy. I mean, obviously this one has got cats on it, because you can get a lot of novelty print fabrics around and about, and this one's just got little pansies on it. But I just matched the green up on those, and then because you're not seeing any of the other pattern at any one time, then they match. So go choose whatever you like. You might have leftover fabrics from doing quilting or from dressmaking, or you might just walk into a charity shop and see a dress or something, or a shirt that you like or you want to use, and that's all fine too. So you're going to need your fabrics. You're going to need one for either side, depending on which ones you're using. But then we also need a layer of fabric for the inside. Now, as I said before, this could be a quilting wadding. If you wanted to do that, it could, I mean, I've just used an old sheet here, so it's just going to be on the inside. Obviously this has been boil washed, and it's been laundered and then steam pressed as well, in order to make sure that there's no bugs on that or anything. But what I've done, so that's my fabrics. So what I did with the pattern, if I just show you this, is because this pattern fabric here, if I put it on the straight of grain, so just fold the square corner to corner, like that on the straight, then the pattern will just fit on it from the very bottom to the very top. If I stuck with the pattern as it was, with the bib as it was, I was going to have to use a lot more fabric in order to do my bibs. So I've taken off the bottom. Let me just measure that for you, because that might be of interest to you as to how much I've taken off the bottom there. I've taken off the bottom 1.5 inches, just over. And all I did was I made a mark at the point of where I wanted my piece of fabric to stop, and then I just drew a line that just curved it round and joined the original line on the side, and it took off that point. That said, I do think this point does lead itself to a bandana style bib. And again, I just thought something, you can make bandana style bibs, can't you, for dogs and animals and stuff. But anyway, I'm just saying. I do think that without the ruffle is possibly a slightly more masculine shape. When Harriet, our granddaughter, has worn these, it's not mattered that extra 1.5 inches at the bottom there is missing at all. You've still got a lovely shaped bib, and it's been very useful and very quick to interchange and then to get washed and to dry. So it was just a way of using fabric that I'd already got, but if you've got scraps that are that size and you can incorporate that size, carry on and do that. I'm just letting you know that you can just make these slight adjustments to the pattern and everything will still work out. So if I put this pattern on top of this one for you, then you'll see that one there has just literally just got that bottom inch or so taken off it. I think I might have just taken a little bit off the top as well, but that's the basis of it. So what we need to do is we're going to fold our fabric down, and we want to really try and get it on what's called the straight of grain. So we have a little look on the back and you'll be able to see the fibres making up your fabric. Let's just see if the camera will come. And sometimes you can see the fibres going across and sometimes up and down. What we're trying to do is have those pointing like a compass, north to south and east to west, and not on a diagonal where they're kind of all off at all sort of directions. We're wanting to try and keep that mesh on the back there, or that design on the back there, quite straight. The other thing you do need to be aware of is if you are using what's called a directional print, so this one here is an example of a directional print, where we want all of our unicorns to be the right side way up and not sort of going off at an angle, and the characters, because all of these and all the flowers all go from sort of south to north really in terms of their orientation. So if we were cutting out our pattern, we wouldn't want to put it on the diagonal and have the animals at an angle. We'd want to make sure that we stayed north to south in order that those animals are the correct orientation round. So just be aware of that. So once you've got your fabric, let's fold it in half. We can just finger press that down the edge. We're going to take our pattern piece and we're going to put it on right at the bottom to right at the top. And you can either use weights or I use pins. And we're going to pin the fabric pattern onto the fabric. That line there for the fold is absolutely right on top of the fold line of my fabric. So just make sure that all follows all nicely. And these patterns have already got what's called a seam allowance added to them, and that means then that they will come out slightly smaller than the pattern because we're going to sew them together and turn them round, and that way then you don't get a roughened edge on the edge here. It's always going to stay nice and neat when they get washed, because bibs do tend to get washed rather a lot. So we're going to pin this fabric onto here. And then once you've done that, you can use your fabric scissors. And all we're going to do then is we're going to cut around the edge of our pattern piece, our fabric and pattern piece. Try not to take anything off the actual paper pattern itself, but we're cutting right where that fabric paper ends and the fabric starts. Try and do long, slow strokes rather than shorter ones. And then on these curvier bits, you may find that you need to lift your fabric up slightly. Just try and manoeuvre your scissors round in order to cut a nice clean line, as cleanly as you can. and sometimes it's better to do halfway and then come in from the other side, and then you can then, rather than try and bend your arm into like a gymnast. These little sections here from the centre here, which is just now folded out, is a great size for an applique letter. So hold on to those scraps, because you can put an applique letter on the side of that, so something like this could then decorate a plain bib that you've got for another day. So just keep those to one side, and then these scraps here can also, I also save those, and they can be used for applique for things in the future. So you're going to do that with all of your fabrics. Now, if you're working with a big piece of fabric and you're wanting to get out as many as possible out of your fabrics, you could always make a full size pattern. So where this one is cut on the half, you could add the other half, so that when you fold these out, you actually put that on top of your fabric and then draw around it, and you might find that you can move them around and get more out of your fabric that way when you're laying all 3 layers together. But for me today, we're just going to do the 3 sections like this. So this is my second fabric, and I'm going to do it, finger press it again, and do exactly the same to cut out the next shape. And then I'm also going to cut out one shape in my middle, my lining in the middle. This case it's just from an old sheet, and you're going to need those 3 layers to go forward. You can make them with just 2, but again, we're just remembering that the amount of dribble that babies have, we're just trying to put an extra barrier layer in to soak it up and not to mean that the baby doesn't get a cold or wet chest at all. So if you want to meet me back here when you've cut out the rest of your fabrics, and then we'll move forward and talk about getting these sewn up. Okay, so here we are with our 3 layers now. We've got our 2 pattern sides and we've got our plain side, depending on what you're needing. But what we're going to do now is we're going to turn these so that we've got some facing. So we're going to put them what's called right sides together. So if we look at this red one, we've got a beautifully printed side with this lovely design. If we turn it over, we can see that that side's not printed. So that's the wrong side of the fabric, or that's how we call it. And this is the right side of the fabric. So always think of the right side of the fabric as the one that you want to see when you or whoever is going to be wearing this is wearing the garment. So we're going to put the 2 printed sides together first before we do anything else, because we want to make sure that they come in the right order. So the order that you're putting these down is important, because if you, no, well, let me just do this one first. So then what we're going to do then is take our lining fabric, and then we're going to just put that on the top as well, and just line everything up nicely so that everything is sitting well together. We're doing it this way, so the 2 nice fabrics facing each other and then the lining on top, because when we fold this round, after we've sewn around it, we want to be able to see those 2 patterned fabrics to be front and back, and for this lining fabric to be sandwiched in between the 2. If we were to put our lining fabric between these 2 fabrics, then when we turn it round, you would see the lining fabric. So that's why it's really important to have the right sides of your bib fabric facing each other, and then your lining just goes on top. Just smooth the fabric with your fingers just to make sure that that's lying all nice and flat. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then put some pins in. Now I tried to pin the direction I'm going to be sewing, so let's start over here. And we're going to use something called my red pin trick, or you can do a little pencil mark if you want to. Let's get a pencil, because we're going to leave a section here and here about an inch, inch and a half open. So I've just put a little pencil mark on my lining fabric. Because of the colours of my outer fabric, you won't see that pencil mark. But if you're concerned or you're using a delicate fabric, then I use some pins, and I'll just put a pin in this direction in 2 places. And both of them have got red tops, and that means to me leave that section open just there. So it's just a little tip that can just help you get, I call it my red pin trick, but it just depends what you want. And then we're just going to go around, and you can pin the rest of these. And we're securing those 3 layers together in order that we can pin round them. You can also use your pins this direction if you want to as well. It just depends on which way you're wanting to be. But what I do find is better if you have the heads of the pins facing towards you as the person, so that when we start sewing, it's easier to reach the heads to take the pins out. Let's just make sure it's all nice and flat still, because being flat is the name of the game. And pop along here any pins that you need. Well, as you get more confident, you might be able to just put a pin down the middle. It just depends on how you feel and how experienced at sewing fabrics you are. If you're very experienced, you'll knock these bibs out in no time at all. And the fun then is in the personalisation. What I then do is just turn this over, because I can see the white edge of my fabric here, and I can see a little bit where I've got my fabric poking out over the top. And all I do there is just trim off anything that's larger than the white, because what we don't want to do is miss anything when we're sewing round. And you do get little variations when you are sewing your, cutting your fabrics out. And then if we turn over this side, I can see that my lining fabric is a little bit bigger in places. So I'm just going to trim that white off as well at this moment in time, just so that when I'm sewing it, I know where the edges of my fabrics are. Just be careful not to try and cut through any pins, because that won't do your machine any good whatsoever. Or your blades of your scissors, should I say. So I'm just trimming it back so that we can see the edges. Again, if you are an experienced sewer, you will know this isn't a very important step, especially if your cutting's very accurate. But if you're a beginner, it's one of those things that can catch you out, because you might not catch all of your layers of your fabric when you're sewing otherwise. Okay, how are we looking? Pretty good. Just do this bit just here. And as I say, this video is aimed at beginners, and therefore if you, nudge the camera. So if you are experienced quilter or sewer, then you can speed up this video and watch it however large you want. Maybe you're used to quilting but not sewing garments like this. So you can see my pins all the way round, which is fine. And now when you are using your fabrics, your machine, you want to make sure that you're using a colour of thread that coordinates with both of your fabrics. To me, it's going to be an off-white, so I'm going to use like a creamy off-white colour for both of mine. In fact, this beigey one might look really nice and not show up, because we are going to be top stitching in the future, and it's better if you can put your colour down. Yeah, that'll do fine. Okay. Let me just change my threads. So my machine has now got the same thread in the bobbin, in the bit that goes in here, as well as on the top reel, so that I've got the same colour in both. And that's how we are going to progress. I could have used a red if I'd have wanted to as well, but I think that the cream will be a little bit more neutral. And what I'm going to do is, I've got my ordinary presser foot on, and I've got a size 80 needle in, because we're going through a woven fabric, so 70 or 80 is fine. And something else I didn't think about, but if you are wanting to put any designs on the front of your bib, you want to have put those on before you layer up. I'll put a note on the screen so that it doesn't catch you out. So you want to decorate whichever side of your bib, out of bib fabric you are decorating, before you layer and put them together. But as this one's just going to be plain, then it doesn't matter so much. Okay, we are going to sew these with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is fairly standard for this type of garment, because it's just a quick and easy, and it's a small seam allowance that works well on these types of things. So 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimetre, it's about the same. It's not exactly the same, but it's about the same. And what I like to do is I like to move my needle, because generally on machines you can move your needle from left to right within the space and still be able to sew neatly, in order that I create that seam allowance so that I can use the edge of my presser foot. So this is my presser foot here, which is the bit that sort of sits on top of the fabric and goes around, and it'll go around like that. And I use the edge of the fabric against the edge of my the edge of my presser foot against the edge of my fabric, and that then gives me the seam allowance I need so that I can stay fairly accurate. And learning to have an accurate seam allowance is one of the key things to improving your sewing. So if I put that onto there. So let's start at one red pin, and I'm going to take my pin out. Once I've lined it up on my fabric, I'm going to take my pin out, and then I'm then going to start and be able to sew. And we've got some curves, so I'll show you how to sew around these curves, and then we'll move forward with that. So we've got our needle lined up in our presser foot. It's not in our fabric as yet, and I've got the threads at the back of my machine. Sometimes you don't have threads at the back of your machine if you've got a more electronic machine that cuts the threads for you, and you can just start sewing. But because mine's an older machine, then I need to hold on to my threads so they don't get pulled into the machine when I start to make a stitch. So just be aware of that, because again, that can neaten your sewing for you. So for the first couple of stitches only, I'm going to hold on to the threads. So let's just take a couple of stitches forward, and then I'm going to press, I've let go of my threads now, and I can press my reverse button to just take a couple of stitches back. And that's going to then form almost a knot in the stitching so that it won't unravel when we turn it round. I also have a button on my machine that will allow me to, whenever I finish sewing, my needle will always finish in my sewing work and in my fabric, and that's what I like to engage. So I'm going to use that now. So it's an up down button, and I press that and my needle's gone into the work, and every time I take a few stitches, my needle will always finish inside the fabric, and it holds it still for me. It means it doesn't move around. If you've not got that function on your machine, or you're using a vintage machine, then you will instead use this here, which is your hand crank, and when you turn that towards you, it'll put the stitch into the needle into the fabric for you, because if I turn that, look, it's moving the needle up and down, as you can see. And that's what you want to do. So every time you stop and want to change direction, you're going to make sure that your needle is in the work in that way. So I'm coming up towards a pin, and we're going to be changing, and I can see that if I carry on stitching, my presser foot is going to sew off my fabric, because here's my fabric edge here, and there's my presser foot there. So I need to follow this curve round, and we want that to be nice and smooth. And the way we do that is we put our needle in the work, either using the button or using our hand crank, and then we can then leave that needle in. We can lift up the presser foot. Can you see I've got a room under my presser foot now? And then we can change the direction of the fabric. The needle is holding that fabric firm, so it's not going to pull out, it's not going to go anywhere, but it allows me to pivot, which is what we're doing. We're pivoting on that point in order that, and on that stitch, so that we don't lose that nice smooth curve. Once I've changed the direction enough, I put my presser foot back down again using the lever, and I can take a few more stitches. And then when I get into a pin, I'm going to take my pin out, because I don't sew over pins, and then I want to change direction again. And to get a nice smooth curve, you're better to take fewer stitches and change direction more often than you are to get right to the edge and then change, because then you might have a point. So again, we're going to just lift up the presser foot, change the direction slightly, and do a few more. You can sometimes put pressure on your fabric with your left hand, and that will then help the fabric move along on a smooth curve, but you just want to be aware of anywhere where your fabric starts to lift up or starts to bunch, because you want your fabric to lie flat. In which case, if it starts to bunch up or you start to get ripples, just stop, needle in the work, lift up the presser foot, change your direction, and everything will go much smoother for you. And on these garments, these bibs, because they are so small and just so quick and easy, taking the time to get a really lovely finish is what's going to elevate it for whoever you make these for. Take out the next pin and keep sewing. Don't go too fast, just go nice and slowly. Coming up to another pin, so I stop while I take that pin out and carry on round. You can see I'm still using the edge of my fabric as my guide for my seam allowance. And then we're coming up to a really tight curve here where we've got the back of the bib, so we're going to take our time doing that. So let's do a few stitches until we start to feel like the fabric's bunching. Take that pin out, and then we can lift up the presser foot and then change direction and do a few more stitches. And then I can see I'm going to come off, so lift up my presser foot, change direction just a little bit, do a few more stitches, stop, change direction, and you get so that I've got my hand on the presser foot here, lever, and you can just change direction really quickly and easily. It doesn't slow you down at all in your sewing, and it makes a really lovely smooth curve, and I'll show you when I've finished how smooth that curve can be. So now let's just smooth our bib out again as we go around this corner here. Coming up to a pin, let's just stop and take that one out, and then we're following round again. I can see my fabric is bunching up, so I'm going to lift up the presser foot, and as soon as I lifted that up, did you see it drops down flat again? And then let's carry on round. So again, it's not, I'm going to go too far into the fabric, so let's stop and turn around. You can see here my head of my pin's the wrong way, so let me just take that one out. So getting into the habit of putting your pins in the right way, the direction you're sewing is easier. And then needle in the work, lift up the presser foot and pin it, turn it around. Stop and then change direction. Change direction. That pin out of there. And just follow that curve all the way around as neatly as you can. I think my seam allowance is a little bigger than 1/4 of an inch, but it will still work. So, and then round this bottom one. And when we get to the bottom here, then I'm just going to reverse again to that bottom pin. Then we can take our needle out of the work, lift up our presser foot, and get our scissors or our snips and take off our threads. I take my threads off quite close, well, very close actually, because it helps not to make any marks on there. Okay, so let's have a look and see what we've done. So let me just show you these top bits, because that shows you how nice and neat that curve around the top can be when you just do that pivot design. Okay, so the next stage then is we're going to then, because we've got some curved edges around here, we're going to do some notching in order that we can then make this all lie flat when we turn it round. And if you've not seen the difference between notching or not, there is a tutorial on my channel to tell you why it is and why I would recommend you do it, because it's very important in order to make this look really lovely. Basically, your fabric on edge on here is longer than when you put it into the inside, so it'll all bubble and ripple up on side your sewing. So it's particularly important on anything with curved edges that we just trim those back or take the notches out. So I like to use pinking shears, which are these ones here. They don't have to cost a lot of money, but they've got these triangular blades on them, and when they cut a triangular edge. So I tend not to trim back this section here where it's open, because if you remember we left that open section through into the middle. So I avoid that, but then I start just by that, and then I'm just going to trim this seam allowance back using my pinking shears. Great to ask for, I use these a lot. I know they're a bit of an old-fashioned tool, but I do use mine a lot. You can get different designs on the blades, but the pinking ones are great for this type of thing. If you've not got pinking shears, then you're going to need to mimic the action of those, and you're going to take little snips, and you're going to take them little snips out of your fabric in a triangle shape. I'll just do a couple more and then I'll show you. Both do exactly the same. So you don't need to go ahead and buy those scissors if you've not already got them. You can also trim your fabric down first if you want to. These aren't cutting very well. And then just do your triangles into what's left. The tighter the curve, the closer together your triangles need to be. The more gentle your curve, the less close together your triangles need to be. And you're going up to, but not through, your stitches. So you're going close to those stitches but not through them. And that is why I say that the pinking shears are quicker, because obviously they can cut multiple triangles at the same time. Just be really careful not to snip through anything you don't want to lose. So make sure your little tags around your neck are out of the way when you are snipping to trim this back. If you feel like you're going to be cutting through too much, just stop and just reevaluate what you're actually cutting through. Pinking shears make a great gift for a birthday or just because present. So they don't have to cost very much. You can pick them up from like 10 euro, I'm going to say euros, but 10 euros, £10. And when you finish, you've got this. So you've got the smaller seam allowance, and that's about the kind of distance I've gone with my snipping round my edges. And then what we're going to do then is we're going to reach inside. We're going to go between the two patterned sides, so not between the side that's got the lining, but the two patterned sides. And we're going to put our thumb in and go all the way down to the edge just here. And then by holding onto it with that index finger, we can push that inside the between the layers, and then we can pull on that to pull through. Let's do that again on this side. So my thumb goes down into the centre. If you've got a turning tool, you can also use that. Or if you've got something like the end of a knitting needle, not the pointy end, but the end with your sizing on, you can also use that instead and put it inside, and then just wiggle your fabric down, and that will help you turn it through as well. It just depends what you've got to hand. So here we go. So now what we need to do is just need to do a little bit of manipulation of the fabric, because the fabric tends to want to fold in. It doesn't want to sort of separate out neatly. And if you just press this now, you're going to lose some of the size of your bib. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to, sometimes just dampening your fingers can help. We just sort of roll the fabric until you can see where, or gauge where those stitches are that make the seam. You want the stitches from the seam just right on the edges. Sometimes you can sort of roll it back on itself, and then you're just going to finger press it with your fingers for now. We are going to press these as well before we start to sew them, to make sure that they're absolutely flat. So just leave the gap where you turned it at the moment. Don't worry about that for the moment. We'll do that at the very last. So again, here, look, there's an area where it's all folded in. So we're going to go into the edge there, find that edge where the stitches are, and then just pull those out and through. Just takes a little bit of time, but if you were bulk making these, this is the kind of step that's really easy to do while you're watching TV or listening to a podcast or doing something else in an evening. So you can do these in batches if you wanted to and get to a certain point. The other thing I like to use is that if I've got a thick knitting needle, is the blunt end, and then you can just sometimes run that along the seam as well, and that helps just to push those edges out as well and gets that stitching line right onto the edge. So again, going into the ends of the bits going around the back of the neck, are they the ties? I don't know what you would call those. Then we can use that section again. We're just wanting this to lie really flat and everything to be poked out and true to size before we then move on to the next stage. Okay, a little bit there where it's not folded out, look, I can see, so I can just go back in again. And now we can see that doing that snipping around the edges allows these to lie flat. If we hadn't done that, we'd get little ripples on the edge of our fabric here and it wouldn't lie flat. The other thing that we can do now is go to where our opening is, where we turned it round, and we're just going to make sure that those fabrics are lying on top of each other with an approximate 1/4 inch seam allowance on them. so everything's lying nice and flat. We are going to press this as well, and we've chose a particularly flat area in order to do that, because that will then be easier to sew together when we need to. Okay, that's flat enough for me. Let me tidy up the desk, get out my iron, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, so while my iron is just warming up, let's just go back to these. And again, if you've got this is a wool pressing mat, which I find to be really useful for these small projects, because you can take your pins and you can just pin into it. So if you wanted to, get that edge out, and then you can just pin along your edges, and that will then help to make sure that your bib is keeping its shape. And likewise, if you think you've not quite got it all out, you can use the edge of a pin just to pull out your fabrics, just to make sure that they're sitting nicely and on the edge, if you want to. It's all about, and you're trying to make sure that you don't see the fabrics from the different ones on the other side. So like here, I don't know if you can see there, I can see quite a lot of the red poking through to the front. So I'll just roll that fabric back to the back, so that the only fabric I can see on the top, if possible, is the grey fabric of this top on this grey patterned fabric. And that will then help that all sit nicely. Once you're ready, because this is quilting cotton, we can go over the top with the iron. I've got it on steam as well, and I'm just pressing between my pins. And once I've done that, I can take those out and then press over that flat edge, which will help. If you've got a delicate fabric, perhaps using a silk or a wool fabric, you can always use a press cloth as well. This one's a silk organza press cloth, but you could use a fabric handkerchief, or you could use a pillowcase or a tea towel, and that just protects the fabric from, perhaps if it's got a printed design on it or any sparkle or graphics, and that will help protect your fabric underneath. It will take the heat of the iron away from it for you, so that it then doesn't make your fabric go shiny. Quite often you sometimes have shiny fabrics where the heat of the iron is just I'm not using my words very well today, am I? I do apologise. Has scorched or heat damaged the top fabrics. So there is a little bit of water in here just for a bit of steam, although I can't hear it coming out at the moment, but steam will make it there it is, a little bit easier for you. And we're just going to take the time, because the more time, the neater this lies down when we're going, before we start to top stitch it, then the neater everything will be at the very end. So again, I'm just paying particular attention to where that opening is, and just give that a little bit of steam. Then let's just flip it over, and let's just press from the other side as well, just to make sure we've got this lying as flat as we can. There we go. So you can leave your iron out if you want to press it the final thing at the end, but for now we're done. So let me just put these away. We're going to go back to our machine, switch that on, and now we're going to line up the edge so that we're going to be sewing, we're going to move the needle so we're sewing right on the very edge. Now I tend to like to sew mine so that I've only got a small amount of the presser foot on, so I'm going to move my needle across to the left. So let me just select the button to do that, and then if you watch the needle, it's going to gradually start and climb across the edge, and that's going to give me just a nice little edge, because I can look through. Just get my awl. I'll take this off here to show you. I can look through this section here of my presser foot. That section just there, I've moved my needle across to this left hand side just here, in order that then I can only have a little bit of fabric under my presser foot, and I can see exactly how close I am to the edge. So I like to start at the top here, because I think that's less noticeable than starting on your bottom curve. So I start on one side of the ties. I'm going to put my fabric in so that I can just see about a couple of millimetres of my fabric, because we're now going to top stitch this together so that it all lies flat. And this is particularly useful for new mums when they're new mums or anybody doing the ironing, because if you've top stitched it like this in this way here round the edges, look, then it makes it easier, because it will always go back to the original shape that it's supposed to be. It just lies flatter. So let's take a couple of stitches forward, couple of stitches back just to form that knot, and then let's put our needle in our work when we stop, and we're going to take it nice and steady doing this. And we're just going to stop every now and again and have a little breathe, and if we need to change direction, we're going to change direction. See how slow I'm going, so you don't need to go racing around when you're doing this section. We didn't need to pin it because we ironed it and we pressed it and everything's all lined nice and straight and flat for us. That's my starting thread. I'll just keep those out of the way. Take a breath and then carry on. So I've stopped there, lift up my presser foot, change my direction to come around this curve. The more sweeping curves we can go a little bit faster on. Just try and keep a nice straight line, you're not wanting to be wiggly. Just give your machine some time because it is going through 6 layers of fabric, because you've got the 3 layers but it's all double, so it is going through quite a lot. We're coming up now towards the gap here where we had our opening, so just make sure that's lying nice and flat and how you want it to before we go on to it. And then because we're sewing close to the edge, that's going to close that up for us at the same time. So we've gone past that section now, so let's just keep moving around. So we're coming up to where we started, so again we're going to go around this curve first. Nice and steady until we need to change direction, and then we just lift up the presser foot, change direction, do a bit more and change, and then we're going to come around a bit more, and then we're going to come to join up, and we're trying to join our stitches up as closely as we can, and then we're going to just reverse back. Needle out of the work, and let's cut our threads off really close. Now you can either cut them off like this, let me just show you that way, or the other way that you can do it is if you've got your long threads, it takes extra time, again it just depends how much of a nice neat finish you want to have, but what you can do is you can pull both threads through to one side by threading it onto a needle, or if you sometimes pull on a thread, it'll pull a loop up, but because I know that I reversed on these, it's not going to do that for me. So it's like an invisible finishing. And then I'm going to put the needle through to the other side, to the stitches on the other side. So both of my threads now are both coming through from one side of my fabric. And then going to do 2 knots just to hold that fabric together, those threads together, and then I'm going to snip them off so they're both the same length, and then thread both threads through the eye of the needle together. And then what I'm going to do is right by where that knot is on the fabric, I'm going to put my needle in the side there, so I'm going through the little bit that we've edge stitched, and I'm going to run my needle along that channel created when we've turned those fabrics round. So you can see sometimes my needle keeps wanting to poke out, so so you can't see the needle on this side, look, there's no glint of the needle there, but you can see the needle in there, And then what you do is you push that through. So it's going to bury those ends in so they won't ever come undone, but they won't even poke out either. And give it a little tug to pull that knot through into your fabric. And then if you pull on your threads and let your thread sort of bunch up a little bit, you can see how it's just bunching up slightly. And then when you snip your threads off and then smooth out the fabric, the ends of those threads will have like a long end on them, but the cut ends will have just popped back into the fabric again, and it gives you a lovely neat finish. Because again, we're making these as neatly as we can to give us that elevated finish. So here's our finished bib at the moment. Again, you can press this now if you want to. There's our two sides. We can see the edge stitching, and we can see where that edge was where we went over it, and this side here as well. All's nice and neat. And so now we need to then decide a button and also then our buttonhole. So let me get my machine set up for my buttonholes and I'll show you how to do that. So we're going to need a buttonhole foot. So for mine it's like this. And then I'm going to press a little lever on the back of my presser foot shaft there, and that's going to drop this section off. You've seen me do that already, so keep that safe, don't lose it. Easy for it to end up in a bin or something. And then on here, on the little hook there that holds onto it, there's a bar here on my presser foot, and that's going to then go underneath there, so I can lift up my presser foot and then clip it onto there. So now when I lift my presser foot, my buttonhole foot lifts as well. And also what I'm going to do is take my needle down once and back up again, because that's going to allow me then to pull on the bottom thread and use something to sweep underneath, and that takes both threads down on underneath my stitching. So I went as if to pick up the bobbin thread, so needle down and up again, and then that sort of starts to form a stitch, and then by sweeping something underneath, flat underneath the threads, underneath the presser foot while it's up, that's then enabled both of those threads now to be underneath on my work. We need a button. Hold on a second. Okay, so I've chosen this little love heart button. I don't know if you can see it. It should be quite nice. And what I need to do is just pop this. Oh, I'm going to need to take my presser foot off again. Sorry, I'll reset it up again in a minute. So I'm going to put the button in the back section here. This section here slides. So I pop the button into this little cradle just here. Oops. On the longest side, not the shortest side. That's it, and then clip it together. And that's going to make sure that when I make, it's a little bit fiddly, when I make my buttonhole, it's going to be the right size. Okay, so the button's in the back there, so let me just pop this back on again. So clip it onto my presser foot, needle up and down, and then swipe underneath, and that'll bring those threads through to the other side for me. And I'm going to do one buttonhole towards the top and then one a little bit further down. And my buttonhole sews backwards, so I need to put this in with the bulk of my fabric at the back. Oops. If you're using snaps, you could just use the manufacturer's instructions just to make your snap closure fit onto your fabric. I'm going to do about there, that will do. Switch it onto my buttonhole of my choice, and I do like the, which one will I do? I'll do number 16, which is a straight one with the two side edges. And then I'm just going to, if I can find my ends of my threads, they're there. I'm going to hold on to my ends of my threads. I'm going to pull down the little black lever. Often there's a lever because that's the auto reverse thing. So mine just clips up here, and then I can just feel for it and pull it down. But look at your instruction manual for your sewing machine to see where yours might be. And then I'm going to hold on to the threads for the first couple of stitches, and then it should be fairly hands-free. Buttonholes are one of those things that either go right for you or they don't. So it's pushing onto the reverse button now, so it's going back to the start of the buttonhole, and then it's going to do the other side. And the machine beeps when it's finished, so I'm not holding on to anything. Just got my foot on my foot pedal. And there it beeped, said it had finished. So now let's take that out. And I do snip off my threads close to the stitching. starting and stopping threads. And there's our little buttonhole on there. Okay, and then what I do then, this is essential, okay, this next step is essential. You're going to take a pin and you are going to look at one of the blunt ends of your buttonhole and you're going to put your pin on the outside of your buttonhole and you're going to put it across so that it spans across the edge of your buttonhole like that. So on the other side you can see where that's positioned, hopefully. And on that side, because if you use your quick unpick to open up the buttonhole, so you want a quick unpick, often you get these with your machine like this, it's got a point and it's got a blade right in the middle of that little U shape just on the end there. Just on the end there, the blade is just in there, that's just a point and your blade's there. So what happens is you're going to look at your buttonhole and in the middle you're going to be very careful, watch your finger on the other side because it is sharp, and you're going to push your point of your quick unpick through the in between the two sides of your buttonhole, and then you're very carefully going to just slowly push it along towards your pin, making sure you're not catching anything underneath. Very slowly. The pin acts as a stop because it's very easy to push too hard and then to slice through the end of your bib and you have to start all over again. So you're going to get close to your pin and then you're going to stop, and there we've got the little slit for our buttonhole. Take your pin out, put your quick unpick away. Don't be tempted to finish it off with the rest of it. There's mess. Because then you're going to use your sharp nose scissors or your snips and then you're going to snip up to one end. And then you just make sure that you've got right down to the end on this side as well and snip down to the end there. If you've got anything like fray check liquid, then you can use some of that. I usually just ruffle up the stitches on the end here, and then if you fold the edge of your buttonhole out, you can see where it's fluffy on the edges there, and I just snip those fluffy bits off. And again here, just snip those fluffy bits off. It's just to neaten it up. Any loose threads you can just take out. Just be careful not to snip through the actual threads holding your buttonhole in place. You can tell when you start to, it gets a bit thick where if you start to go too far. Okay, so that's our buttonhole. Obviously you can put on, I'm just going to put on one on here now just to show you, but you just repeat the process further down on one edge down here for you. And then when we're ready, we're going to take our button out of our buttonhole. Let's switch off our machine. We're going to get a needle threaded up with some thread. I've got a little tip for that as well to make sewing on easier. So if you fold your thread in half first, without having put it on your needle, go to your needles and choose your needle you're going to use to sew your button on with, one with a decent eye, and you're going to put the loop through your hand sewing needle. Yeah, so that you've actually got your thread's double, so you've got 4 strands. When you get to the end, you can put your knot on the end of your thread and just snip that so you've got a nice loose knot. Sorry, a nice tight knot, but short ends, so take off the ends of your threads. Then deciding which side you want your button to be, I'm going to put mine on this side. I'm going to take a little stitch on the end of on the end here first. So just take a little stitch because that's just going to hide our knot underneath our button, so the knot isn't on the wrong side, because we want this to be as neat as possible. And then I just thread my button on going in and out. So I don't try and hold the button in place while I'm stitching it on straight away. Then I position my button so that it's where I want it to be, over the top of the knot as well. And then I'm going to now go back through my fabric, and then that will then allow me to hold that button in place. And now I'm going to push through from the other side to find the hole of the button and back on again. there is a tutorial on my page under Skill Builders, how to sew on a button. So I'm just going to do that quickly now, because you can always go and find that if you need to. Just take some trial and error to find out where your hole is. Don't put your button too tight, because the parent has got to be able to put the button through the buttonhole to hold it tight. And again, we want to make sure these buttons are sewn securely on, so they don't present a choking risk. So once we've done that, I then sort of bend the fabric away from the button, and I've got my thread on the back edge, and then I'm going to poke my needle through close to where my stitches are, holding my button in place. Ooh, fingers are slippy. So we're trying to make this back edge here as neat as possible. It's going to be almost invisible on that side. And we're going to wrap the thread 4 or 5 times around the button and just pull. And then I can then take a few stitches that are just going through the threads of the buttonhole, not the buttonhole, through the stitches holding on the button. Sometimes my words come out without thinking. So 4 or 5 of those. And then I'm going to now thread my needle back through just one layer of the fabric. So check, so now you see that's not right, because you can see the glint of the needle on the other side. So let's take my needle back out again, and I want to just go through one layer off the lining. That's better, look. You see, you can't see any glint of the needle now, and you can't see any glint there. So I'm going in right underneath the button, and I'm coming out right on the edge. So again, this is to give us a long end, because the long ends don't unravel as much as quickly as anything else. So that's pulled that through, so that button's nice and neatly sewn on. So let's bunch up those threads tightly, snip them off, and then smooth it out, and then those raw edges have disappeared inside. And there we've got our button sewn on neatly, ready for doing up for our neckline for the baby. So, you've just made your first bib. How does that feel? Does that feel doable to be able to keep going and going again? When you think how much these are in the shops, honestly, it's so much money, isn't it? But you can make them so quickly and easily at home. And I just hope that you like this reversible bib that, as I say, I've just done. And as I've said before, you can add your embellishments on. This one's got the lace down the front, so do all of your embellishing before you actually go ahead and layer them together. You can embroider on the front here, you can put an appliqued letter on the front, you can add the ruffle round the outside if you want to, you can use one of the other shapes, and I will do tutorials on the other shapes in due time, but just for quickness and a quick and easy tutorial, just for a palette cleanser for you if you've got some fabrics available, then I just thought it was a good and easy one for you to be able to see. So if you've liked this video and you found value in the content, I'd love it if you give a thumbs up. If you could leave me a comment as well, that really does help. It counts as an interaction with my video, and it really does reward me for the time that it takes just to post these videos and share them with you. It's my pleasure to always do so, but if you can take just a moment to do those 2 things for me, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment, then I would really, really appreciate that. So, on behalf of me today, I hope you've enjoyed making this bib. I'm off to make a number more. I've got some really lovely fabrics to choose from, as I'm sure you have in your stash as well. And I'll see you all soon. So take care, everybody. Bye.